there lived an evil ogre. He was extremely dangerous and had special powers of shape-shifting into animals. He used to change into a dangerous animal and used to hunt people from the nearby village for his meal. People of that village were scared for their lives. No one knew where he lived or where he came from, except one cat named Puss from the village. Puss was a dear pet of an old miller from the same village. The miller had 3 sons. The 2 elder brothers were very lazy and left most of the hard work to the youngest. When the father died, all he owned was divided between his sons. The mill he left to the eldest son, the donkey to the second, and to the youngest he left his dear cat Puss. The elder brothers left the youngest on his own. And so he was very unhappy. He said,
"Alas, this cat is of no use to me, and I am too poor to even feed her."
While he was sitting and thinking what he should do to get his bread and butter, Puss jumped and said,
"Don't worry, master. I will get your living for you."
The miller's son could not believe his eyes, and rubbing them in surprise, he said,
"You can talk?"
"Your father left me to you, as I can do many other things, if you do what I tell you to."
"What can I do?"
"Only buy me a hat, a pair of boots, and a large bag. Leave the rest to me."
The miller's son spent his last pennies and gave him a very smart hat with a feather in it, a pair of brown-colored boots, and a nice large bag. The cat then put on his pair of boots and his hat, and then took his bag and at once headed towards the jungle. It was a rare thing to see, and so Miller's son called him Puss in Boots. Puss picked some carrots from the farm on his way to the forest and put them in the bag. Not very far from the mill, there was a rabbit warren, where Puss put that bag down with its mouth wide open. He then hid himself in the bushes. As the little greedy rabbits sniffed the fresh carrots and jumped into the bag to eat, Puss pounced on the bag and pulled the string out of the bag. Puss carried the bag with a fat rabbit in it on his shoulder and came to the king's palace. He bowed before the king and said,
"Your Majesty, I have a present for you from the estate of my master, the Prince of Carabas."
Taking a fine rabbit out of his bag, he said,
"My master has sent this rabbit for you with his respects."
The king accepted the present. In the days that followed, Puss in Boots regularly visited the king, carrying hares, partridges, and turkey, and presenting them all to the king in the name of Prince of Carabas. Finally, the king told Puss,
"Tell your master that I accept his gifts."
One day, Puss heard at the palace that the king and his princess daughter were planning to drive beside the riverbank. He raced home to his master and told him about his visits to the king's palace. He then said to him,
"If you will follow my advice, your fortune is made. I want you to go to the river and swim in the river. If anyone asks you your name, you have to say that you are the Prince of Carabas, and leave the rest to me."
The miller's son did what the cat advised him to do, and while he was in the water, Puss took away all his clothes and hid them in the bushes. As the king's carriage arrived, Puss ran towards them shouting,
"Help, help, help! My master, the Prince of Carabas!"
Hearing the shouts, the king ordered the carriage to stop and asked what the matter was. Bowing before the king, said Puss,
"Oh, your majesty, my master was bathing and someone has stolen his clothes. He will catch the cramps and be drowned."
The king ordered his servant to ride back to the palace and get one of the best suits for the prince. While the miller's son put on the royal suit, he looked just like a prince.
"This is my master, your majesty, the Prince of Carabas."
Puss graciously introduced the miller's son to the king and the princess. Though Miller's son was poor, but he looked as handsome and smart as a prince for anyone to doubt. The king invited him to sit in his coach and said he would drive him home. Puss told the coachman where to go and ran ahead of the carriage across the field. On his way, Puss met some haymakers. He warned them.
"If the king asks you to whom do these fields belong, say it belongs to the Prince of Carabas. If you don't say so, the king's men will cut you into pieces."
The haymakers were so frightened that they promised to obey the cat. Puss warned everybody who met him on the way. The king, who passed by after some time, wished to know, and so he asked, "To whom do these fine fields belong?" The haymakers answered, "To the Prince of Carabas." The king was very pleased and turned to the miller's son and said,
You have a fine property.
Running ahead, the clever cat reached the huge castle where he knew the ogre lived. Though terrified, he entered the castle boldly and said,
"Oh, great ogre, I am a great admirer of your powers."
The ogre was pleased to hear it. Puss further said,
"Dear me, I would like to see your ogre ship."
Yes, of course,
replied the ogre in full pride. In a flash, the ogre turned himself into a lion and roared loudly.
"It's amazing that you can become as big as a lion. But can you become a small creature such as a mouse as well?"
Puss asked the ogre bravely.
That's not a problem at all,
said the vain ogre, and he changed himself into a tiny little mouse. Puss sprang upon the tiny mouse and gobbled him on the spot. At that very moment, the king's coach stopped at the ogre's castle, and Puss came out bowing very low and said,
"Welcome, your majesty, to the castle of the Prince of Carabas."
The king, the princess, and the miller's son went inside the castle with Puss and sat down to a great feast. The king was very pleased with the miller's son and thought him such a good match for his princess. He turned to the miller's son, saying,
Will you marry my daughter?
Your Majesty, it would be my pleasure to marry such a beautiful princess.
Soon the miller's son and the princess got married and lived happily in the castle. Puss in Boots became a great lord and lived in comfort for the rest of his days and never ran after mice anymore. The end. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe our channel and press the bell icon to get future updates. And don't forget to comment.